Hey everybody, it's Kathy Bosco from Rethink.fm, the forward-thinking podcast about experience design. Join me and special guests to discuss effective design, technology, and the intersection of helping people and entrepreneurship. From user experience research to product roadmaps, we've got you covered. We've all got questions, so let's get started. Welcome. Today, my special guest is Rachel Cherry. Rachel's the founder, past president, and board member at WPCampus. Today, we're talking about new research that was launched around the state of WordPress in higher education.
Yay.
Have I got it right? Okay.
Yes.
You want to tell us a little bit about yourself, your teams, the purpose of the research, Rachel?
Yeah, hi. And my name is Rachel. And so I founded WP Campus back in 2015, which is wild. This is 10 years. This August will be 10 years. And so much has happened over those 10 years and lots going on. But I have spent most of my career in higher education. I had a short stint in the outside world and on the other side, as we sometimes call it. And so lots of experience doing like enterprise web development. So there's lots of CMS action in our world. Most of my experience is WordPress. And these days, I'm actually the senior digital accessibility developer at the University of Rochester, where I live in Rochester, New York. And so interestingly enough, I don't actually do tons of WordPress work these days, but we do use WordPress at the university. I do help some other universities with their WordPress, so I'm not completely out of the realm, but it does we have a lovely community at WP Campus, and I'm obviously very invested in helping them out. And there's been a lot going on in our space, and there's a lot going on at the intersection of kind of higher ed and WordPress over the past, I don't know, 6 to 12 months. And so it felt like the perfect time for us to do some deep dive research to learn more about what's going on in our community and what's going on with our members. And number one, what we hear from folks in our community is how much they want to hear about what other people are doing. And so we are 100% volunteer, and so there's only so much we can do. But so we are working on some ways to kind of highlight and bring to the surface, not only like what people are working on and the wins, but also like what are the struggles and what do they need help with, so that we can highlight that, we can share it out with the world, and hopefully, our community and organization can help, but maybe other people can help as well. What are the gaps, and where do people need support? What plugins do people need? There's a lot of need for very specific functionality in higher ed enterprise web systems like WordPress. And I'm sure that these are solutions that are needed in other enterprise instances of WordPress. And so there's definitely need for new plugins and other support. And so we started putting together this survey, which has been a lot of fun, and it took us a few months to get it off the ground. Because, like I said, we're all volunteers, which is really great. Like people dedicating their time and their energy and their brains to this effort. And so the survey is live, and I hope that if you're listening and you use WordPress in higher ed, that you'll take the time to fill it out. It should take about 15 to 20 minutes. It's not super short, but it is supposed to be a pretty in-depth survey about how you use WordPress. And we worked so hard to make it as short as possible. And Kathy was a great member of our team, and Elaine Shannon, another great member of our team,
Web
Pat
developer.
Lockley.
She's a web developer from Georgetown University.
Yes,
That's
thank
right.
you.
And I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, you're fine.
Pat Lockie. He is
Lockley, yes.
Lockley, right? Pat Lockley. I'm not sure where he works at the intersection of higher ed and also nonprofits and things like that.
Yes, he does a lot of higher ed and nonprofit work. He works for himself.
Okay.
And so he does a lot of, he's been a great member of our community for years, as Elaine has as well, as you have as well. Elaine actually designed our EduWapu. It's a fun fact about Elaine. And then we've had a lot of great assistance from our partners over at Human Made. And so is Alex Aspinall has been a great resource helping us get this developed and the survey developed and shared. And so it's been a great team every Monday now for months. I'm a little sad to see it all come to an end because it's been such fun hanging out with you all and learning from you and
But
having
now
that great,
we get
yeah,
the insights and the results
right?
and to help everyone pull back the curtain for each other so that they can see how other people are solving. I think maybe for listeners, it's important to point out that in higher ed, um, these the types of websites used in higher ed span all of them. Like there's every kind of purposeful site imaginable in each higher ed's portfolio, from donation sites to event sites to knowledge bases to flagship sites. It's like it's a whole ecosystem unto itself, and these schools have really large portfolios that they manage and maintain. So it's a fascinating space of open source resources, a lot of Drupal sites, a lot of WordPress sites, probably other proprietary sites that I'm not so familiar with that teams use as well. But,
Yes.
um,
It's quite exactly all of that. It's a fun and I used to always say that like higher ed was WordPress Enterprise on a budget. And and what you get out of that is creativity because people are having to really flex these systems at scale for a wide variety of websites, and they're doing it with not only limited dollars, but limited headcount. And so they get really creative and it's really fun to watch and experience alongside. And I think something that's also really interesting about our space is that at most universities, there's never just one CMS. There's like three or four. And whether or not that's a good or bad thing, it allows you as like a web professional or practitioner to have insight into how other systems do things so that you can kind of bring that into other systems and you're not just kind of living in one bubble. You're allowed to kind of flex your ideas and think outside the box and not be trapped in one space. And so that has its own challenges. It's not a perfect system. And there are reasons why people have all kinds of CMSs, but I do think it creates kind of an interesting culture of knowledge and experience, and it's a lot of fun.
I could see how that would be an interesting challenge for someone who specializes in accessibility too.
It really is. It makes my job interesting is a good word. It does make my job interesting. And ultimately, I feel like you can have too many CMSs and that creates some issues around all kinds of stuff. Ideally, you probably want to be in the 1 to 2 CMS land because the reality is managing a CMS is a lot of work, especially in an enterprise environment where you have hundreds of users and you're having to do training and you're having to make sure that content is compliant with any policies that you have, like accessibility or other policies. There's a lot of work behind the scenes that goes into making sure that all of this functions, that your content stays fresh. And so the more systems you have, the more training you have to create, the more oversight you have to create. It makes it just a little bit more challenging to kind of have some shared resources and solutions because you're having to do it for several systems. So it's not necessarily a great thing or a positive thing to have many CMSs, but it is fun to, in my experience, you work in these. I always kind of think of my universities like these little cities, and you have all these departments, and everybody's kind of like they're doing their own thing. And again, that's kind of a not always a good or a bad thing, but you get all of these kind of mini ecosystems, and you get to kind of learn how different people solve problems, and you kind of get to build your own community around that. I have a lot of experience doing communities of practice work, and I'm setting that up at my university now. And so, bringing all these people together and kind of having this brain trust and hive mind of sorts, and learning about how people solve problems. What are their problems in the first place? Can we solve these together? Can we work together? And just kind of have a lot of fun in that space.
Amazing, amazing. So back to the survey, the state of WordPress in higher education. What were some of the goals and objectives for this particular research?
Yeah, so kind of like what I was saying earlier, bringing to the surface a lot of this knowledge in the hopes of providing solutions or support. And so we are, and also kind of learning, because I think one thing that I would love to see more of in kind of a higher ed web ops space, I call it web ops or web operations, whatever term you use for the kind of the work that we do. What I would love to see more of is people talking openly about how they do things and the wins and the losses and the things that worked and the things that didn't work. Because the reality is that I've been in this space for a long time. I've worked at like 6 different universities. I've been in touch with this community where I'm constantly listening to people kind of talking about how they do things. And every a lot of the problems are the same. A lot of the things that people are experiencing are the same. People are having struggles with, governance which is a big loaded word, which means lots of different things, but everyone has that problem and how are they solving for it? Um, a lot of people had the struggle with centralized or decentralized. And I think there are pros and cons to both. What worked for you and why? I think that there's no one turnkey solution for everyone. And so there's a lot of context and a lot of metadata that goes into it. But the reality is that like you kind of have to like go to a conference to hear a lot of people talk in depth about what they're doing. And I'd love to see like published people publishing about it or talking about it openly, like having case studies about how people are doing this work because I think it's fascinating, one, and I think it'd be super helpful. A lot of these problems are kind of resourcing and efficiency problems. And so if we can, as a community, kind of help solve a lot of these resourcing and efficiency problems, the amount of time and energy and money that we could be saving our institutions. So back to the survey, really wanting to bring to light how people are using WordPress, how teams are being resourced. We had a lot of questions in our initial drafts of this survey that we do hope to kind of come along and have some post surveys because there's such great information that we can help surface. But we tried to keep it as short as possible, and we decided that maybe we'll have some very topic focused surveys after the fact, but really trying to learn about our teams. And then trying to learn about the WordPress specific stuff about, what are your struggles? What are the things that you like and don't like? What is the help that you need? There's a lot of sentiment questions too, because, a lot of this is very sentimental. I mean, there's a lot of, hard logic about, using a CMS, but there's a lot of UX and kind of a mental energy that doing all this work, and there's a lot of kind of values and kind of ethical stuff that kind of goes into using open source software and governance of open source software and leadership and priorities. Like, for example, if you have a personal value or priority that things need to be accessible, you want to use a CMS that's accessible and you want to use a CMS. You don't want to invest all of your time and energy into adopting a platform and you have no idea if the leadership cares about the things that you care about. And that's why things like open source governance are so important and having policies and being very clear about what your priorities and values are as, say, like WordPress. Because when it comes down to it, especially on an enterprise level and especially in higher ed, you're not just building, like you mentioned, there's so many sites. You're not just like setting up one WordPress site and moving on. And if something, you don't like it, you'll just, oh, we'll just move it later. when you pick a CMS, you are implementing hundreds of sites. Like it is not easy to turn the ship around. I mean, I'm using the term WordPress because we're talking about WordPress, but insert any CMS. Like if you pick a CMS, and you go to implement it in a higher ed space, the odds are is that you are building hundreds of sites with it. And then you find out, 2 years later that there's a problem or there's some issues that, you don't align with, or now the CMS is going in a space, I'm sorry, at a direction that you don't want to go. You can't just turn on a dime and go somewhere else. You've invested. It would take hours. It would take, possibly years to migrate.
Yeah, a lot of
So
risk involved with making choices at scale.
exactly, risk is a great word. Like, and so there's a lot of sentiment questions in our survey about how you're feeling about WordPress right now, because, let's be honest, there is some things going on with WordPress right now that are not ideal. And how does that affect, your feelings? And, I've talked to a lot of people and they're struggling because, it's hard. It's not only hard to experience all this because it's disappointing and there's like emotional attachment involved, but it's scary of the risk for their jobs and their roles. And, what does the future look like for them? There's a lot of unknowns right now. I think unknown risk is another big word, like, and very important right now. There's a lot of unknowns about what the future of WordPress is right now and the impact that's having on a lot of people in higher ed about, because you know, they don't know if they have to drop all their plans and change a CMS. They don't want to do that. They want to focus on they I think a lot of the goals of like implementing these systems is to not have to think about it. Like these systems should empower you to do other things, so that you can be your own creativity and you can have your own strategies and you can do your own specific things for your institution and your department. And so when you're having to spend all this, mental and physical and time, energy, thinking about I may have to move, that's stressful. It's like an unnecessary stress on top of
Right.
everything else that's going on. Because also in higher ed, with all these funding issues, there's a lot happening right
Yeah.
now. And so yeah, so we want to, kind of take a temperature of how people are feeling. How can you be supported? It might be that the best thing that you can do right now is just to manage risk, is to manage known risk and kind of batten down the hatches and just and you'll be fine until some future date when variables change. And so can we help with that, And so how can others help with that? So the end goal is to provide insight, surface what's going on. I do feel like I want people in higher ed to not feel alone in what's happening. They're not alone. And so how can we kind of help share that information? How can we surface needs so that hopefully those needs can be met?
I think uh, I think as the results get posted, it will be interesting. I think people will appreciate seeing where they sit in relationship to others in terms of the uncertainty, in terms of other CMSs they might be considering or evaluating, in terms of having to defend WordPress or not to their stakeholders, what themes and plugin challenges exist, how that's being resolved. So one of the things I liked about the survey was that we're looking through the lens based on your role on the web ops team. So half the team is like keeping the ship afloat, right? Like we got to keep these sites well maintained, accessible, empower people to own their own content. And the other half is like people publishing because they've got content they need to share or a project they want to promote, or they're on the mission to get their work seen and done and managed. So I think that looking at it through the lens on your role, whether you're a content person, a design person, a UX person, an IT person, a manager, like all those different roles come to mind. And I think that the survey set up to look at it through those lenses as well, which I'm wondering what that will come out like in the results is also
Or-
anything you're seeing as people are starting to respond to the survey that's surprising to you these days?
So far, nothing super surprising. I was
Okay.
just scanning the current response, the current kind of like the current kind of report that's generated for us. And so, to kind of touch on what we were saying, yeah, I think another thing that would be great is like we're trying to surface, what are some common, just kind of core functionality, like, is it working for you? What would you change? And to try to get people from like possibly even WordPress core and others to kind of think about, what are the needs in our space? And so, there's questions about, like how long did you wait to do the block editor? What are the benefits and challenges of the block editor and things like that. And we asked the same about full site editing because that's another big thing in our space. Um, let's see, I'm scrolling down. Um, Unsurprisingly, we asked the question, what other CMSs have you like looked at? And unsurprisingly, Drupal was number one. Um, but there's questions like, what do you experience as the benefits of like the plugin ecosystem? Right now, the number one answer is ease of updates,
Mhm.
ease of discoverability, things like that. And then, what are the challenges? Unsurprisingly to me, the number one is plugins are often too bloated with functionality I do not need. That's a common thing in like especially in an enterprise space. You've really got to think about scale. You've got to think um, about performance, and you've got to think about all these kind of and when you got plugins that got like too many things going on in them, you've got that's just even more variables to think about. Every time you want to do an update, you may have to run tests on those things. There might be surprise functionality you didn't know was there, but it's showing up on your front end somewhere, causing issues. So that's a common issue, especially in the enterprise space. Um, what plugin functionality for higher ed do you feel is missing? And so the number one, accessibility testing. But that's getting better. There's lots of players in that. There's some up and comings. But that's been a challenge over the past few years because of the block editor, because it's a very different editor, very different way of testing stuff within the CMS. But there are some tools for that. So that's getting better, but there's still work to do, I think, in that space. Number two, the thing that I keep talking about is governance management. People need reporting and
What's
things to help them with like access control and all these things and like kind of reporting on what's happening. Like I said earlier, governance is a bloated word, and I could talk for an hour about governance plugins that would be really helpful and go into detail. Maybe that could be another episode. But so yeah, that's anyway. So nothing super surprising so far. It's been I was trying to scroll down towards one of the questions. But yeah, it's really great. And it's really great to see all the stuff come in. It's really fun to read some of the answers. We've got a lot of open-ended kind of opportunities to provide commentary, and I always appreciate every time we have surveys, I always have fun reading those because I like people are snarky and I'm here for it. Um,
And of course, we'll protect everybody's private
of
data.
course.
But I would hope to have the chance to experiment with some of the AI tools to get some of that qualitative data out of there and sort of
Yes.
because we're experimenting with that as well. I How long will the survey be open? Because I know you want to present the results at an upcoming event or prior to an upcoming event. Can you talk about that?
Yes. Right now it's going to be open until May 23rd.
Okay.
And we have the flexibility to increase it or extend it a week, but that's kind of our hard cutoff is the 30th. So right now it's the 23rd. Please try. We may or may not extend it. And then there is an event on July the 10th. I really hope that I've got that date right. Um, I'm like 99.9% confident it's July 10th. We're having a public like webinar to share the findings. And if you take the survey, then you'll get early access to that data on July 10th, and you'll be invited to the webinar. And so we hope that you'll complete the survey and then join us at the webinar where we can do a deeper dive into the data and we'll have open discussion and questions. And in WP Campus Slack, we have a channel, Research State of WP, where you can come and ask questions. And I was actually in there a minute ago. I'm about to I was just going to post some early screenshots of some very high level anonymized data to kind of share what's coming in because it is really interesting. And I hope that sharing some of this data encourages people to contribute their own and just kind of help. The more we can consume, the more we can surface the needs and get our space kind of out into the spotlight a little bit more.
I will put the links to the survey, to WP Campus, to the great agency Human Made and how they're promoting the survey. I assume they're part of the webinar as well.
Yes.
Yes. Alex is running that too. So that'll be fantastic. I guess a question for you, since you're here representing higher ed, before we wrap up, might be what roadblocks or obstacles do your teams face and how do you overcome them?
So I think right now one of our biggest obstacles is really the breadth of content and managing, having insight and oversight of the massive amount of websites and content that we're responsible for. So for example, we have hundreds of WordPress websites, and we're having to build tooling to kind of analyze them. We don't have great insight into kind of a higher level site map from an enterprise level. When there's kind of general issues of when users move from site to site, that's a really common enterprise higher ed problem, right? There's very much the internal perspective of how these sites work together, and then there's the external user experience where they don't have all this context that we have. There's a common joke in higher ed about acronyms. Internally, we use acronyms for everything, but if you're not an internal faculty staff member, do you understand what we're talking about? So it's kind of a similar description. It's we have from inside the bubble, we kind of understand how things work, but do our users understand that? And when they change websites and they look dramatically different, do they understand? Are they confused? But also, it's really hard to do any kind of analysis because you're moving between all these different websites.
Oh,
and,
that makes
and so yeah,
sense.
it's and so there's a lot of ways that CMSs can help with that can help kind of build these, bigger systems. WordPress multi-site is really common because at least then you can kind of have the same setup for multiples of sites, and that can be helpful. But even within the multi-site, it's challenging to communicate between the sites, or there's a lot of custom functionality needed. It's possible, but it's you got to build a bunch of tooling so that you can talk to the other sites or heavily use the API. But in my world, it's a lot of accessibility, and which means it's a lot of enterprise accessibility solutions is resolved by kind of having as much information as possible, because we understand that at an enterprise level, things aren't inaccessible because people don't care. It's because they're under-resourced. It's because they need education. And so, the more data we can have about where problems are and learning why they were created, the better we can create resources to help them keep it from happening again. And so I live in the land of governance data. And so yeah, that's kind of where a lot of where I've lived in university land is really trying to gather helpful data
Mhm.
from how our systems are being used, running compliance tests and getting that information back and reporting it out so it can be resolved. And how can these CMS systems help us do that? Uh, and so right now it's really building a lot of external tools that actually pull data out of the CMS so that we can analyze them separately, especially when you live in an ecosystem with all kinds of CMSs. We're gathering data out and we're analyzing it and then using that to build a strategy for how we can do enterprise level remediation by sharing resources, by having more training, by building culture around shared services. So yeah, that's where I live right now.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, it's the UXer in me gets really excited about um acronyms and like, oh no, and shared language and customer or user-centric language and ownership of areas and global taxonomies. And I could see how that would be a huge challenge in higher ed for sure. Um,
Yeah.
Wow, Rachel, thank you. Thank you so much. I can't wait to see all the results. And I just really am grateful for all of the advocacy work that you do for higher ed, but also for accessibility generally and community and sharing. So I really appreciate you. We will put the links to everything in the show notes. Are there any other resources you'd like to recommend or that you want people to learn more about that you think we might have missed?
Uh, no,
No? Okay.
feel free to join the WP Campus Slack if you want to chat about things or ask questions. We're working on, we being WP Campus, are working on some new stuff for this year, which will be exciting to roll out soon. Some new resources that we're working on to try to really kind of bring people together to have conversations about all this stuff. So be on the lookout for that. You can subscribe to our newsletter or join the Slack and yeah, find out more.
Okay, great, great. And one last thing, since we're talking a lot about AI this summer, I'll just say it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like the state of AI work in higher ed is that higher ed teams are still building policies around how to manage and use AI, which is great. That's sort of where we're at with that currently in higher ed. Am I getting that generally right?
Yes, I'm not too heavily involved with that work, but I am a little bit lately, and I feel like I know that a lot of universities are still kind of in the policy forming phase. I know that some universities already have policies. Um, but then even once you create policies, enforcing them is a whole other thing. In the enterprise space, there's just like 4,000 tools that everyone uses. And so if you're a university that's not already on top of having very centralized kind of enforcement or governance of tools, then you've got the problem of, well, we can have a policy, but if everybody's off doing their own thing, how do we enforce the AI usage? And so, I don't think that they're going to solve that problem anytime soon. I think that's going to be a slow haul for a lot of universities, but I do know that it is a thing. Like our university, it has a whole committee that's working on it, and they're doing lots of great work on that. And so, yeah, things move things move a little slow in enterprise land.
But
Uh,
with
but it's
intention,
a
that's
with
really,
good, yes,
really
yes.
great.
Yeah, but yeah. It is what it is. It's not unique to the AI challenge. But uh, people are excited about AI in higher ed, and so they're doing the necessary work. They're doing the good work to
Mhm.
make sure that, if we're going to use it, we're being ethical, we're protecting our privacy. In higher ed, a lot of universities are, setting up their own, LLM so that they can protect their data, things like that. So it's quite a fun, I think if you're into AI, it's quite a fun kind of sandbox to, especially if you work at a research university, and using AI and research and things like that. So yeah, there's lots of work being done. in higher ed when it comes to AI.
And maybe next year we'll do the state of AI in higher ed or something. Well, thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much. Again, I'll make links available for everyone. Please complete the survey before May 23rd if you touch higher ed, especially website operations in higher ed. So, all right. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kathy.
Bye-bye.